You know, every time we discuss this, I can see why people are rampantly frustrated at game journalism because it's just a bunch of hit pieces and bullshit. I mean, now we've had situations like this before, and I'm gonna like describe what's going on. But of course, you see the title IGN. You can't spell ignorant without IGN. They are once again adding their 2 cents to the whole Resident Evil 5 is racist subject matter. And I'm like, dude, please shut up. Nobody wants to hear you guys talk. 7 out of 10, too much water. God hand sucks. Oh, you can't hit the Flash. He's too fast. People make fun of IGN for a reason because of the ineptitude that comes out of their mouth every time they speak. It is ridiculous. It is absurd. It is stupid. It is dumb. And it is dumb logic, and it is meant to be criticized like the dumb logic we see before us. So it's not the first time that someone has said RE5 is racist. And I guess the implication comes from Chris Redfield shooting down a bunch of Africans in Kijuju, a fictional Africa, shooting down these Africans, and thus people saying that it is a racist game because of that. So, as you always know, if you played the series, we gotta go back to the origins of Resident Evil. It is called Biohazard in the land of the rising sun. Biohazard means biohazardous outbreak. A biohazardous outbreak leads to bioorganic weapons. Everyone is susceptible to infection. You could be white, you could be black, you could be Mexican, you could be Spanish, you could be Asian, and we've seen that demonstrated all over the series. We've seen TJ Storm rant into a storm and say people were infected in Antarctica, they were infected in RE5 in Africa, and now after that interview, they were infected in China. These people are a victim of circumstance, and it is kill or be killed. If they have the virus, then it doesn't matter what color their skin is. You have to take them out before they take you out and infect you. That is the crux of Resident Evil. It's all about survival, horror, surviving the situation. And it seems that these game journalists don't really understand the core and basic fundamentals of the thematics involving the series. And it's so disappointing. It's so aggravating. It is so stupid. But let's get into this video. I'm going to plug in my headphones and I'm going to put them on my head. And I'm going to listen to the absolute drivel of IGN try to explain to me that RE5 is a game that cannot be remade, and I will give my points where valid.
With Resident Evil 4's release last year, Capcom's project to remake the glory years of its survival horror series is complete. But as the game's post-credit scene suggests, the remakes aren't over. And so the big question is, where next? The obvious answer is a remake of Resident Evil 5. But on the game's 15th anniversary, it's clear that moving forward chronologically will take Capcom's remakes into the series' weakest era, an era of gameplay and narrative decisions best left in the past.
Capcom's weakest era. Well, I think you can individualize certain games, right? I don't think it was better than the original trilogy. Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 was like nigh perfect. I don't think anyone really had a problem with the original trilogy and the follow-up Code Veronica. You know, it's people that really like that series and how it progressed forward into the remakes, the first remakes of Resident Evil 1, and then you followed up with RE0, and then you had the GameCube exclusivity, then you had the Outbreak games. So they were really hitting their stride early. And then you moved on to the action scene, the action territory. So the first Resident Evil, it reinvented survival horror forever. Horror games were on the menu, everyone needed to be Resident Evil 1. Then we move on to the second reinvention. Everyone needed to be Resident Evil 4, the hottest action game I ever seen this face in the planet. A game that perfected third-person camera angles, and everyone wanted to use over-the-shoulder in their games. It was revolutionary. It was something they wanted to do. It was something that clicked, finally. So everyone wanted to copy that homework. Then we move on to the action era, which is this era in particular. So we had RE4, the banger, RE5, which was a dramatic improvement on some gameplay mechanics and story. The story is very pertinent to what's going on. I think the story of RE5 is better characterized than RE4, where the story felt like a little bit of an afterthought. Now you're going back to origins. You're going back to the origins of the progenitor virus. You're going to see Wesker and old members, Chris, those characters, those original STARS members that were very, very important to carrying the story. Even in Code Veronica, when you saw Chris and everything, they were very pertinent to carrying the story in that game as well. You saw the return of Wesker, and now you see him again, and Jill and everyone. It means something. It meant something. I never get people that just solely shit on RE5 just because they decided to go a little bit more into the action territory. I do feel like RE6 was a bit too much. And I think there are things that 6 does get right, like some of the combat, you know, the mobility, the sliding around, that was cool. And there's some things it gets wrong, like the overbloated campaign and story. I think after RE6, it gets a little bit dicey, like during that whole gap, and then we go back to things like RE7 that kind of revitalized the franchise yet again.
Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade. At least
I strongly disagree with that statement. If they could remake RE4 and make aspects of it better, they can totally remake RE5. Like, it's a no-brainer. Get Dev 1 on that shit, it'd be Kino.
not to the standards of Capcom's best work. And so the answer is not to remake, but to rewrite.
Okay, I don't know why the IGN store just came up when I pressed that shit. Nobody want to go there, bruh. All right. So, that was funny, though. But let's go back to what they said.
But to rewrite.
I don't think they need to rewrite it either. That's... no. Why? There will be rewritten elements, but why change the whole thing? Like, if they change the whole thing, you're not in Africa anymore to, like, just mitigate some controversy, that's gonna be weird. Because this is a major critical point in the storyline between Wesker and Chris. This is the end of the rivalry between those two. So if they change that, they change the setting, they rewrite all that, of course you can add in additions, maybe cool little features, new elements and additions to the timeline, but to take out and subtract is the issue that RE3 Remake had, and you don't want to repeat that.
Resident Evil is a survival horror series. Not that you'd know that playing Resident Evil 5. Sure, it features a constant flow of horrific imagery, but Resident Evil 5 is an action game through and through. That's evident in its cover shooter mechanics, vehicle chases with on-rails turret sequences, and the constant rattle of assault rifles. Even its visual design evokes the sandy shades of modern military games that experienced mass popularity in the late 2000s. It all speaks to a series that had lost its way. Rather than reflect on the tenets that were the foundation of its experience, Resident Evil 5 looked to the contemporary gaming zeitgeist in an attempt to find a new lease of life. The result is an unholy hybrid of Resident Evil, Gears of War, and Call of Duty.
I think their philosophy of doing Resident Evil 5 back then the way that it was... What the fuck is this malware bites bullshit? I'm sorry, I got a little bit distracted by that. But I think their ideals of trying to make RE5, it was a sequel and successor to RE4. It was going to carry over all the mechanics that made that game work and do new and original things to that added gameplay, like stomping on enemies on the ground, co-op attacks, doing things with your partner, you know, trying to just double down on what was there and make an immersive sequel. I think that was the goal. Maybe there was some trend chasing, trying to see, oh, how do we get cover mechanics to work? Gears did this perfectly. Maybe there was some of that there, because then when Gears came out, everyone wanted to do like the one button cover, right? And in some ways, some games got it right, some games got it wrong. I never believed that RE got cover mechanics right, but once again, they were trying to enhance RE5 and try to make it into a game that succeeded RE4 in every way, gameplay wise. So it really comes with the territory of how they tried to do this game and enhance that sequel. And Resident Evil 6 is the same. They tried to take what worked in RE5 and enhance it and make it bigger and better. Now, in the process of that, is this guy right that the scares got mitigated between RE5 and 6? Absolutely. It's not a scary game anymore when you're doing like suplexes and neck breakers to the zombies and you're just having too much of a fun time. That being said, them remaking RE5, they could put back in horror elements. There was a little bit more horror elements than usual replaced and put back into RE4 Remake. What makes you think just because there's co-op doesn't mean there can't be scary situations placed in the game more? Resident Evil Outbreak also had co-op ventures involved. It like had 4-player co-op mingling, fucking around, and totally getting decimated by Regis lickers and monsters. It could totally be done in the right space, but for Capcom, they have to mingle that in with the actiony nature of RE5, so equivalent is going to be equivalent to RE4 no matter what, and they have to also see what scary thematics work for it, and I think that's going to be their biggest challenge so far.
It's as ugly and unwieldy as it sounds. This design appears to not just be a misguided attempt to follow Western successes, but also a misreading of its predecessor. With Resident Evil 4, director Shinji Mikami deftly reinvented the series through the use of a new over-the-shoulder camera angle.
I don't see how it's a misreading when it's an action game just like RE4 and it just builds on what RE4 had, but they add more additions to the process. You can say the co-op was not scary to you, but it was an addition to the game nonetheless, and it also added in stuff like duo mercenaries where you can play with a friend, and it enhanced that mode for the better.
The perspective allowed for a more kinetic, action-heavy game, despite
which RE5 is still a kinetic, action-heavy experience.
this, Mikami never lost sight of the terror at the core of Resident Evil. Through the use of enemies that were strategically placed to provide undulating waves of tension and fear, and the inclusion of Ashley as your vulnerable charge, combat encounters were focused on surviving overwhelming horrors rather than dominating foes.
This is true that, once again, the horror was lost in translation. Honestly, in my personal opinion, I think Ashley did add tension, but in a very dumb way, because once again, she can't fend for herself and she can get punched and shot by all the ganado, and it just leads to frustration, just like some of the dumb AI tactics that is done in RE5 where they take all your resources or they use certain guns. It leads to frustration in a different way. And I don't find that scary, I just find that to be annoying. Anyone else feel that way? I find that to be more annoying than scary than anything else. But at least Sheva has a gun and can fight things off in an action-heavy game, which I can appreciate when I really think about it. Let's continue on.
Resident Evil 5, meanwhile, presents its enemies as waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry. Their purpose is cannon fodder, a wall of meat to slow your progress through levels. And those levels are not locations to be explored. Instead, they are...
I disagree with that as well. There's plenty to explore when you body all the enemies and you get items like treasures, you find emblems in the background. There's a lot of exploration to this game that I think the guy is overlooking because it's quite simply an action game first. That's the opinion that I'm getting from there.
Largely funnels that push you from entrance to exit. Resident Evil 4 may have replaced the series' traditional continuous structure with discrete levels in an attempt to move away from the backtracking-heavy design of previous games, but it preserved the spirit of locations like the Raccoon City police station. The village, Salazar's castle, and the island feature interlocking, explorable pathways that solidify these locations as authentic spaces rather than obstacle courses. Resident Evil 5 has no interest in this, with the majority of its stages being little more than corridors peppered with dead ends to hide treasures in. Their lack of authenticity means no one will ever mention the Kijuju Autonomous Zone in the same breath as the Spencer Mansion.
I mean, that's subjective, personally. I'm pretty sure there's probably someone out there that finds levels in RE5 to be iconic. I do think, though, I do agree with you that you could say RE levels in RE1 or the older games are more iconic and noticeable, but again, in my personal opinion, this formulates and stays in line with the setting. You're supposed to be in Africa. There's supposed to be shanty towns. There's supposed to be laboratories and stuff like that that leads to tricell and the tricell research and what they're doing. Oil rigs, boats, what is going on? Like these ancient civilizations underground where you're finding out all this new and weird like tech and how they have these giant like sun lasers. So I can't say that they don't add on the thematic that the game is presenting in Africa. I think it can be fuck off protection score. I hate malware bytes, but it can be very interesting and intriguing in the process. And it might not be as iconic as you think it is. It might not be as iconic as I personally believe RE1 is, but it's still something to the background that is interesting, dynamic, and cool.
All this is to say that a faithful remake of Resident Evil 5 would break Capcom's 7-year streak of brilliant survival horror games. It's telling that the series' reset point, Resident Evil 6.
Hold on. It's gonna break their streak of brilliant survival horror games. As far as I know, the only game that people seem to not like that much is RE3 Remake. That's the remake where it's like, oh, you guys got a B team or something to work on it or whatever. You didn't care as much. You cut out content. I'm pretty sure Capcom said they listened to the fan feedback of that game, which is why RE4 was done by Dev 1, the same people that did RE2 Remake. I would say Capcom indeed listened to feedback post RE3 Remake. As long as they don't make a remake like that again, everything will be totally fine and the community won't be up in arms and they won't be constantly talking about Remake 3 every day to want to put Jill on an open weenie roast because I see that game brought up in negative context all the time, just every singular time, even though it has some merits to it. I gave the game a 7 out of 10, but I still wouldn't have recommended it at full price. As long as they don't make another remake like that, it's fine. As long as they don't make a game like that, everything's peachy king, and I think we'll have nothing to worry about. Will they make a bad game in the future? Of course, because the future is not yet set. Will they make good games in the future? Absolutely. It remains to be seen and determined as we gauge and discuss things like this. So let's continue onward.
7 was a reinvention of the very first game, a haunted house that grew ever larger as you unlocked new rooms by solving its puzzles. Clever reinventions of this base conceit is the key to Resident Evil's success, be that dropping an unstoppable force into the house's corridors, such as Resident Evil 2's Mr. X, or expanding the scope of the house. Resident Evil Village's titular location is effectively a giant manor, its corridors are streets, and its rooms are houses. Resident Evil 5's stage-driven structure is simply inferior to this design. A modern recreation of it would only further highlight its flaws.
I mean, again, they should make the shanty towns because they are relative to the themes of RE5. They should make these outdoor areas. You know, one thing I would want to see back is how would they handle things like dehydration, because that's something they wanted to do originally, and that's an idea they never got to realize when they initially made RE5 and they just really dropped it. In terms of like darkness going in and out and sunlight and that affecting your vision and dehydration, I wouldn't mind them bringing that back as a survival horror mechanic and seeing how that would factor into the gameplay. But I don't know at this point, considering there's co-op and there's a lot of other elements and factors that take place there.
Especially coming in such close proximity to masterclasses like the remake of Resident Evil 2. Remakes can, of course, completely redefine the structure of their source material.
He completely said what I said in the initial beginnings of the video. They can redefine the structure, and that includes the level design, huh? That includes the fucking level design, man. It's just basic common sense. The level design, the gameplay, the story, all those things could be redefined for a new modern era.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, is recognisably an updated version of the classic RPG, but its world design and gameplay mechanics are a world apart from the 1997 original, and so you could argue that Resident Evil 5 is actually the Resident Evil most in need of a remake.
I wouldn't say that. I think there's plenty of other games that could utilize a remake before RE5. I think RE0 is one of them. I think Resident Evil 0 is a fundamentally bad game, in my honest opinion. I don't like it. It's just terrible in a lot of ways. I'm talking about leaving weapons on the floor and no item box. It's a lot of things you could fix with RE0, and I think that'd be a lot more deserving. You could remake 1 and that'd be a lot more deserving than 5. Although I wouldn't be against a Resident Evil 5 remake, because if they do it justice, just like they did RE4 remake, it's totally in the ballpark.
Whole new environmental structure and scenario design that reins in the action and dials up the horror would bring it in line with Capcom's other remakes.
You literally just answered some of your own questions, saying of what they could do, and if they do it, then your complaints would be null and void, right? I'm just telling you the skinny here. I'm telling you the whole story. You're saying things that you want that they could basically improve on with enough willpower, thinking, and creativity. And honestly, they could make a remake that is superior to RE5. We just don't know yet.
But all of this doesn't account for Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem: racism.
No, oh my god, no, he said it. No, fuck no. Oh, he said it. I knew he was gonna say it. I knew it was gonna boil down to this. Oh my god, I got a migraine already. Holy fuck. I knew he was gonna say racism. Oh my god. Fuck. Fucking hell. Here we go, people. This is the part of the video where your brain cells will diminish and die and turn into little termites that fall into the sea. Here we go. And he immediately showed the tribalists like jumping into the picture, like, let's home in on this fresh baked racism. Like, what the fuck, man?
Set in a fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. Yes, it's technically the Ouroboros.
What? The primary antagonists are black people. Therefore, this game is super racist. No, the primary antagonist is Albert Wesker, who infected this entire autonomous zone. The people in Kijuju are victims. As you see this victim right here, getting a plaga shoved deep into his mouth. A guy who doesn't want to be infected. He wants help. He's yearning for help. He's trying not to be infected, but you don't seem to notice that. You don't seem to notice that the plaga is causing this widespread epidemic, right? But continue on.
Boris virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting. But the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before their infection.
As for the primitives being here, the Nipada tribe, I mean, I think it was just lore. You can read the notes. You can read the notes where a boy notices that he's becoming increasingly violent. He doesn't know why, but he knows he's becoming more violent, probably attacking people, I believe. And it shows you the victims of this village trying to live peacefully offshore. And there is like villages in certain regions of like places or whatever that remain uninhabited. there are people that will not go into these particular wildlands in fear of being killed, tortured, skinned. These are people that probably don't even speak English, and they will kill any intruders there. So it's best for people not to go into those foreign unknown parts because they are real, they exist, and this game depicting them is also accurate to real life. So there is tribesmen out there, people out there that live in uninhabited regions and they don't have technology or anything like that. So, I mean, you can look it up, you can research it. It's true to form. It should not be removed from the game if it is trying to be authentic and true to form. Think about it.
Intentionally or not, Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent, an uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down via Western intervention in the name of global security.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh, this is so stupid. I'm about to cry tears of pain. This is so bad, dude. You do know that the BSA, they have continents to go in and try to stop bioterrorism. Hell, one of the reasons why Sheva joined BSA West Africa is to avenge fallen brothers who succumb to viruses and acts of rage and violence in this region. It's like night and day. These people have character motivations. There's BSAA establishments all over the place, and you're saying, oh, it's just Western man coming in to shoot all the blacks, when there is a BSAA West Africa trying to also contain the threat in their own region, but they need a little bit of expertise from the man Chris Redfield, who went on dangerous missions after Lost in Nightmares. One of the most decorated BSAA members at this point in time. Why wouldn't they ask him for assistance? Why? The man who went on like hundreds of missions after Jill jumped out the window, why wouldn't they ask someone of that expertise to help them? I would. I'd be like, yo, I need backup. This is the best person to do it. Like, well, there's a reason for him being there outside of just him being white. Right? Do people not pay attention to the story of RE5? You are one of them. You do not pay attention.
This insensitive treatment of people of colour was hotly debated even as early as Resident Evil 5's debut trailer, with writers such as Ngai Kroll and Stephen Totillo pointing out the game's uncomfortable post-colonial imagery. The arguments...
Those are also people that managed to get the victims of the situation and not notice that anyone can be affected. Wrong. You're just bringing them up yet again. I can't believe that we're still stuck on this topic from those two crones who didn't understand. That's why TJ Storm said it wasn't racist back then when other people were covered. It's not racist now.
Some think pieces continued well into the game's release window, with IGN's own former editor-in-chief Hilary Goldstein having also wrestled with the subject.
Delete that article immediately, because once again, and then say the potty mouth of Chris Redfield. Chris rarely swears like in fucking Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 1. He rarely curses. I would say Jill curses more than Chris. Like, dude, especially in RE1. Like, come on, man. Come on, dude. It's like, what the fuck?
But that was 2009, a time when race was apparently a debate rather than a reality. In the 2020s, in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable...
Oh, man. Dude, this is so bad.
...response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an...
This is so terrible. Oh my god. This is mental agony. I'm getting waterboarded physically by listening to this video.
Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game. No.
Sheva's with him, so it's also a black woman shooting Africans as well by your logic. And I do think Capcom did. They tried to make some touches. It's definitely different from the Resident Evil 5 betas where it was Chris by himself. But apparently they said Sheva was already in the game. She was always in the game, meant to be in the game. Just her role was different. She went from being a tour guide to Chris's partner. Which made me believe that in original concepts, maybe it would have been Chris and Jill, but they decided to change it. Now, remember, people told me that stuff doesn't change in development. Oh no, Barry was not meant to be in Resident Evil fucking 4.5 or whatever, but you know, I digress, right? Either way, it's still like a thing where they changed the game around. They toyed with some stuff, and they said, look, we're not going to have Jill here. We're not going to have Barry here in this particular part in the beginning. We're going to change the roles, and Jill's going to be the one that, like, she is the sacrificial lamb in the story where you believe she's dead, and Chris is hunting for answers in Kijuju. Again, people believe that he's just there to gun down black people when there is more context, lore, and story to what's going on in Africa with this mission.
There's one thing I do know. I have a job to do, and I'm gonna see it through.
Remakes may be able to redefine their source material, but there's only so many changes you can make until it's not a remake at all, but an entirely new game. And if you
I kind of agree with him, but what the fuck does he... What is he talking about? Does he think the entirety... He was hitting for them to change RE completely, but he's also talking about the idea of when they change too much, it becomes unrecognizable, but you're saying that they should change RE5 to the point where it's unrecognizable from the original, but it seems like you're criticizing that very idea. I don't get it.
you take Africa out of Resident Evil 5, is it Resident Evil 5 anymore? Even
No, it isn't. Because what does Wesker do? He goes to fucking Africa, affects the people there, and we discover that this is the origin of progenitor, which leads to Ouroboros research, which is why Wesker is fueling Ouroboros as his final plan to infect the Earth and take everyone over. To remove Africa from the equation removes the flowers, the ancient flowers that was used in progenitor, the research there that Tricell set up, which ultimately led to Ouroboros, one of the more dangerous viruses that will prove if someone could be either man or god. That's the ultimate goal. Without Africa, there would be none of that whatsoever. So they need Africa to exist in RE5 Remake to tell that story. If you remove it, where the fuck are the flowers gonna go? Timbuktu? What? Like, what? Come on, man.
with a vastly improved, more sensitive take on the continent, perhaps
Oh, God. He's going through some sensitivity training. Jeez. Oh, my God, man. This is so bad.
one with a black protagonist and a more empathetic look at the outbreak, the experience would simply be too divorced from the original to hold the name Resident Evil 5.
That's it. You're right. Keep going. It wouldn't be RE5.
So where does Capcom go now? Personally, I'd look backwards. Code Veronica is an ideal candidate, as is the original.
Okay, so he's simply saying, oh, they should choose another remake instead, which I guess would be cool. I'm going to say this personally, and I know people aren't going to agree. I'm not really the biggest fan of the original Code Veronica. Sure, I wouldn't say no to a remake. Sure, I wouldn't say a remake wouldn't be better. It just didn't gravitate me like other people. Like I like some folks give this game like a 9 out of 10, a 10 out of 10. I'm just like, it's alright. It's okay. but I thought the difficulty was like way too spiky in places. I thought that there's certain things about that game in terms of the backtracking that were a little bit excruciating. I would not mind though if they went backwards and remade certain games that we need to see renditions of sometime in the future. I do believe Code Veronica should be one of those games, but I wouldn't mind if they did RE5 first either, because Code Veronica is not my favorite RE. They could do that to fix the problem in terms of interest. It's a lot of people that are interested in Code Veronica remake, even if I'm not. That's the only like decent opinion in this video that I seen. Like maybe one or two, but the rest is all garbage.
Original Resident Evil. But if the only way is chronologically forward, then a total rewrite of what comes next is the logical path.
You said that if they get rid of the heart of what makes the series, that might not be the best idea for Capcom. They can't rewrite the whole thing. They can't take it out of Africa. It wouldn't make sense.
Because what followed Resident Evil 4 was not one terrible game, but two. Resident Evil 6 doubled down.
I would not say RE5 is terrible. No. I disagree with that. RE6, I say it's mixed. It's a mixed bag more than terrible. It has some fundamental moments, but I can see why people dislike the game, and I can see why people say, oh, this is where RE fell off on action. It's true. To say 5 is terrible? No. Disagree.
No, tripled down on the action-packed, set-piece heavy shooter design. To the extent—
It's true, they did. Now, I feel like if they remade RE6, it'd be a lot more issues. They have to get everything picture perfect and right on top of making a game that's like 20 to 30 hours long with 4 campaigns and copious amounts of content. That's a game that will take like fucking, in my opinion, like 5 or 6 years to remake, because you have so much to get right and you have to cut out so much chaff. Let's change that video to the Resident Evil game that cannot be remade, Resident Evil 6. Well, I think they could do it, but it would be a monumentous task. That'd be a lot harder. A lot harder, and it wouldn't be racist. Once again, stop using that term.
and that much of it could be mistaken for a third-person Call of Duty spin-off were it not for the monsters. Its restrictive level design practically puts you in a chokehold, forcing you to endure a barrage of bombastic moments that have no interest in evoking any sense of fear.
It's so funny, all the criticism he said about 5 can be applied to 6, if not seen as worse. I would say that the level design in 6 is a lot more like unmemorable compared to 5 and even 4. That much is true.
Resident Evil 6 is a survival horror, only in that it's a horrible game that you have to survive playing. But this time around, it
Okay, that was a good one, I'll give him that.
Doesn't have to be like that. Capcom now has the opportunity to ignore the past and completely reinvent this chunk of the timeline. In Resident Evil 4 Remake's post-credit scene, evil mastermind Albert Wesker details his plans for world domination to Ada Wong. Reflected in his glasses is an image of Excella Gione and the Stairway of the Sun, two significant plot elements from Resident Evil 5.
You know this is a significant plot element with the Stairway of the Sun, which is the birth of this flower place and the birth of Progenitor, all the viruses right here. Stairway to the Sun is prominent in Africa, and you want it to be rewritten and take place somewhere else. It's like, you're almost close to making the connective tissue spark, but you just don't get it. You just don't get it. You're so close, but yet so far.
Which indicates Capcom's intentions. But there's more to consider. This scene is largely a replication of the sequence from Assignment Ada, a non-canon chapter from the original Resident Evil 4. Its shift from unofficial to canon points to a willingness to change. Furthermore, the end of this scene is completely rewritten. When learning of Wesker's plans, rather than dutifully deliver the stolen Las Plagas sample to him, Ada betrays her shadowy boss and forces her helicopter to turn around.
The fuck is he? So there is a combination of things with that scene, but it's still primarily between the original and the remake. some of the same stuff still happens. Ada betrays Wesker, and she takes the sample collection and gives it to someone else in the original. And that happens. I think that happens. I don't know. She monologues or says she's gonna give it to another employer in separate ways in the original, but she said she sent Wesker something different than what she gave to the other employers. I remember that. I keep forgetting their names. I don't remember their names. I don't know if it was the organization or whatever. I'm not gonna speculate here. Say it in the comment section. But I know Wesker does not get the sample through her. It's through another source. And then in the remake, she hears his plan to wipe out billions of lives, which is obviously going to be the first stage of Ouroboros. Overhears it, says no, tells the pilot, hey, shut the fuck up and take me to where I need to go with my other benefactor, and Wesker does not get his hands on it. But he will in the future. It's sort of the same thing, but a different sort of context. You have an ensuing conversation there. It doesn't make the other thing canon or whatnot. They just simply took a little bit from it, added to it, and canonized it. But the same thing still happens. So it just kind of bugs me how he said it that way. It's just a little minor nitpick in my honest opinion. It's a nothing burger, but it's still something that bugged me.
In this moment, the future of Resident Evil becomes unclear. Capcom has given itself
the future of Resident Evil is obviously more remakes, past and present. They're going to try to remake everything they got, I believe. That's the direction that they're going, while also making RE9 in future isolated incidents of Resident Evil. And there's also the 15-year time jump that was established in Resident Evil Village. What happened during that time? Movies and games are going to fill in that gap.
The freedom to do whatever it wants. I just hope it's not a remake of Resident Evil 5.
You hope, but that's not what Capcom says. It's up to them. They own the license, they own the IP, and you are just a terrible gaming journalist.
For more on how Capcom...
And that's it. That's the end of this video. Oh my god, that was terrible. Like, IGN is shit. Oh man, I'm telling you, man. IGN should be the pain advocate for migraines because I had a headache during all of that. Oh my god. Well, I'm gonna end it here. That was a terrible IGN video. IGN is dog shit. And I will see you guys next time. Later.